Please, everyone, allow me to share with you a story from my life. It is a story that carries a scar I will never lose, but it is also a testament to the unyielding will and dignity of one man. Approaching his 80th year, I will do my best to bring every moment, every flicker of emotion, back to life so that you can truly feel what I experienced. Pack your things and get out. This house isn't yours anymore, Dad. My name is Arthur Miller, and this year, I turned 80 years old. When you hear that number, you probably picture a life of quiet contentment. You imagine peaceful days, surrounded by children and grandchildren, enjoying a well-earned rest in the twilight years. But for me, my 80th birthday marked not a time of peace, but a milestone of pain, betrayal, and the beginning of a relentless fight to reclaim my own dignity. On that day, I was sitting in my wheelchair. My body, already frail with age, had betrayed me after a fateful fall that had left my left leg almost completely numb. On the polished cherry wood table beside me lay a document I had just finished, signing my last will and testament. The ink was not yet dry. That thin piece of paper felt as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was not just a legal document, it was a verdict delivered upon a lifetime of sacrifice. Standing before me was the son I had raised, the boy I had nurtured with my own blood, sweat, and tears, with all the love I had and through every day of hardship. On his face, which was once the source of my greatest pride, there was now a cold smirk, a look of triumph steeped in contempt. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes looking down on me with an icy detachment, as if I were a stranger, a burden that simply needed to be removed. Pack your things and get out. This house isn't yours anymore, Dad. His voice echoed in the silent room. Every single word was a blade, slicing methodically into my heart. This house, the very place I had lived for decades, where I had built a universe of memories, the home I had poured my entire life into building, was now being brazenly stolen from me by my own son. I said nothing. There were no words of protest, no cries of anguish. Not a single tear fell from my eyes. It was not because I felt no pain, it was because the shock was so profound, so utterly disorienting, that it left me hollow. I was paralyzed by a feeling of absolute humiliation, an emotional violation so deep that it stole my voice. All I could do was quietly turn my wheelchair toward the old oak armoire in the corner of the room, the place where I had always kept my personal belongings. My hands trembled as I began to pack. I folded a few faded shirts, gathered a couple of old, worn notebooks filled with my late wife's favorite recipes and my own scribbled poems, and I took special care with the worn wooden cane that had become such a faithful companion in my later years, when my legs grew unsteady. Each item, each keepsake, was a vessel for so many memories, so many years gone by. Now, they were all being compressed into a small, old duffel bag, as if my entire existence had been reduced to this meager collection of things. They stood there and watched me, my son and his wife. I can only imagine what they saw. In their eyes, I must have looked like a weak and defeated old man, stripped of everything, with no strength left to fight back. They thought they had won. They believed I was completely and utterly in their control. But they didn't know. They had no idea that even in my weakest, most agonizing moment, the embers of an unbreakable spirit still glowed within me. They couldn't know that the very next morning, I would head straight for the bank, where everything was about to begin again, but in a way they could never have anticipated. A new battle was about to start. A battle for justice. A battle for my dignity. And I, for one, would not go down so easily. My life, by its very nature, had always been a long road of dedication and sacrifice. I had poured everything I had into my work, building a career from the ground up, and raising my only son to be a good, respectable man. For years, I was a structural engineer, a man who understood the bones of buildings. I had the privilege of working on some of the great infrastructure projects that reshaped our cities, leaving a small but proud mark on the country's landscape. I always believed that in my old age, I would finally be able to rest, to live out my remaining days in peace, close to the son I had loved and nurtured my entire life. But life, as we all know, doesn't always follow the script we write for it. Last winter, a single, fateful moment sent my world spinning off its axis. It happened in the quiet, pre-dawn hours when the world was still cloaked in darkness. I had made my way into the bathroom to get ready for the day, just as I had done thousands of times before. But on this morning, the floor was damp and slick. My old legs, not as steady or as strong as they once were, couldn't find their purchase on the slippery tile. In an instant, my feet went out from under me and I came crashing down. That fall did more than just send a jolt of pain through my body. It left me with a devastating consequence. A terrifying numbness, a complete lack of feeling, spread through my left leg. I was stranded on the cold, hard floor of the bathroom, unable to move, unable to even think about getting up. A sharp, searing pain radiated through my hip and back, but it was the fear that truly paralyzed me. I was an old man, and I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that a fall like this wasn't just a simple accident. It could be a final verdict on my independence, the event that would change the entire course of my life. My son and his wife rushed me to the hospital. I spent the next 2 months there, a prisoner in a sterile room, going through endless cycles of treatment and physical therapy. During those long weeks, I clung to a fragile hope that I might walk normally again. I pushed myself through every painful exercise, every grueling session with the therapists, willing my leg to respond. But the reality was cruel and unyielding. The doctors finally delivered the news I had been dreading. The damage was permanent. My left leg was completely paralyzed. After I was discharged, my doctor sat me down and gently suggested that I consider moving into a nursing home. He explained that given my current condition, it would be risky for me to live alone, and that relying solely on my family for care might not be enough. In a proper facility, he said, I would have professional nurses available 24 hours a day. I would receive regular, structured physical therapy and live in a safer environment. It would be, he assured me, a more comfortable and secure way to live. I brought it up with my son, carefully, a little hesitantly. The last thing I wanted was for him to feel as if I were a burden, or for him to carry any guilt about the situation. I wanted to hear his thoughts, to make this choice together as a family. A nursing home? That's not necessary. It'll be much more convenient to have you right here at home. My son's rejection was swift and sharp. His tone was firm, almost harsh. He insisted there was no need for a facility, that it would be easier for them to manage my health if I was living with them. Hearing those words, I felt a small warmth spread through my chest. For a fleeting moment, I thought he was worried about me, that he wanted me close so he could look after me properly. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Even with a paralyzed leg, I had my son and daughter-in-law by my side. I had a home where I could depend on them. I was so incredibly naive. The moment I returned home from the hospital, everything changed with a dizzying speed. I was no longer allowed in my own bedroom. Without a word of explanation, my son and his wife moved my things into the storage room. The storage room. A small, damp space at the back of the house, with no windows to let in the light. It was the place I'd always kept old furniture, holiday decorations, and boxes of things we no longer used. Now, this cramped, musty room was to be my living space, and the door, a solid, heavy door, was locked from the outside. I sat there in my wheelchair, surrounded by the clutter and forgotten objects of my past, and stared at the cold, metal door. I couldn't open it. I couldn't leave. I was a prisoner, locked away in my own home. Day after day went by, with no light, no clock, and no one who came to visit. The storage room was swallowed by darkness, with no window to offer even a glimpse of the world outside. I had no way of knowing if it was day or night, no sense of how many hours or days had passed. All I knew for sure was that I was completely and utterly alone. My son and his wife never once came to see me. They never asked if I was all right, or if I needed anything. The only interaction I had with them was once a day, when they would push a tray with a plate of cold food through a small gap at the bottom of the door. The meals were always meager, lacking any real nourishment, and they were always cold. Alongside the food, there were always a few unfamiliar pills. I had no idea what kind of medicine they were, and just looking at them filled my heart with a vague, unsettling anxiety. What were these pills for? What effect would they have on me? I didn't know. With no other choice, I could only swallow them, acting on a primal instinct to take whatever was given to me. Trapped in those endless days, I experienced an extreme loneliness and a terror so profound it felt like it could swallow me whole. Why were they doing this to me? Why were they treating me like an animal, like a prisoner in some forgotten dungeon? What had I done to deserve this? I had sacrificed my entire life for them, for my son, and now, this was my reward? To endure this cruel and agonizing torment? The physical and mental suffering wore me down with each passing day. I began to think that this was probably how my life would end. I would likely die right here, in this cold storage room, buried in solitude and humiliation. And yet, deep in the core of my being, a tiny flicker of resilience refused to be extinguished. I could not let myself break. I had to find a way out of this trap, a way to reclaim my own justice. I would not, could not, simply accept this brutal fate they had forced upon me. The days, locked in that dark, cold storage room with no light and no clock, just continued to slip by. I no longer knew how many days and nights had passed. My body grew weaker, and my mind started to drift, becoming hazier and more confused with each passing hour. For what felt like an eternity, I slept in a daze. My head was heavy, my thoughts thick and slow, as if I were trapped in a long, unending dream. Even when I was awake, I was overcome with a crushing exhaustion, a deep listlessness that left me with no strength at all. I couldn't focus my mind enough to think clearly. I couldn't even remember what had happened with any certainty. I only knew the cycle: fall asleep, wake up, and fall back asleep again. It was much, much later, when everything finally came to light, that I learned the truth. They had been mixing sleeping pills into the water they gave me. Those unfamiliar pills they served with my cold meal every day. They were sleeping pills too. They wanted me to sleep soundly, to remain in a fog, to lose the ability to resist. They wanted me to become like an old man with dementia, someone they could easily control and manipulate. One time, as I drifted in that murky space between sleep and wakefulness, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice through the gap in the door. Her voice was a low whisper, but it was dripping with a terrifying sarcasm and contempt. "Now go to sleep, old man. Sweet dreams." She said it, and then she chuckled. It was a soft, insidious sound. To me, it sounded like the voice of a demon, cold and filled with a deep, chilling malice. She was taking pleasure in my weakness, in my suffering. She wanted me to sleep forever, to be completely helpless. And then, I heard my son's voice. His tone was even colder, more clipped and decisive. "Everything's ready. Once he signs those papers, it'll all be settled." I couldn't understand any of it. Those papers? It'll all be settled? What on earth were they talking about? My mind was so muddled from the sleeping pills that I couldn't think deeply enough to make sense of their words. I could only feel a vague, creeping terror begin to crawl through my heart. I knew they were plotting something far worse than just locking me away in a storage room. Time just kept passing in that blurry haze of uninterrupted sleep. I could no longer feel the difference between day and night. That storage room had become my entire world, a world wrapped in absolute darkness and suffocating silence. Then, one day, I heard the sound of a key clanking as it turned in the iron lock. The door creaked open. A sudden, violent blast of light shot into the room, blinding me. My son and his wife were standing there. The cold, indifferent expressions they usually wore were gone. In their place, I saw a tense impatience, an unreadable look of anticipation that sent a chill down my spine. They brought me outside. My body was limp and weak, like a rag doll. I had no strength at all to walk on my own. They guided me to a chair at the dining table. And there, sitting in the middle of the table, was a stack of pre-printed papers. I stared down at the documents, trying to force my vision, which was still blurry from the sleeping pills, into focus. The words on the page swam before my eyes, but they were clear enough for me to recognize the cruel and vicious nature of their plan. I hereby relinquish all ownership of this house. My heart felt as if it had stopped beating. All ownership of this house. The house I had spent my entire life building and paying for. The house I had filled with a lifetime of savings and memories. The home I had always believed would be my final sanctuary. The place where I would live out the last of my days. Now, they were trying to steal it from me, right out in the open. I looked at my son, and then at his wife. My eyes must have been filled with a universe of pain and desperation. They were taking advantage of my weakness, of my clouded consciousness, to execute this cold-blooded scheme. They wanted me to sign that paper, to put my name to it, and in doing so, to legitimize their act of theft. A wave of terror and rage surged through me. I wanted to scream, to fight, to lash out at them with every ounce of strength I had left. But my body was far too weak, and my mind was far too foggy from the drugs. I couldn't do anything. I could only sit there, powerless, and watch as they carried out their ugly conspiracy. That day was a nightmare. It was a nightmare from which I could not wake up. I just sat there, in front of that single sheet of paper, the cold words printed in black ink. I hereby relinquish all ownership of this house. My hands were shaking. Not from the cold, but from the fear and the fury that were boiling up inside me. Even with my head swimming in a drug-induced haze, I fought to concentrate, trying to read every single word. I scanned page after page, clause after clause, desperately searching for some tiny loophole, some point of weakness in this cruel document they had prepared. But they wouldn't give me the time. "Dad, just sign it. The lawyer is on a schedule." My son's voice was sharp, filled with an impatient urgency. He wasn't going to give me a single second to think, to process what was happening. He wanted my signature, and he wanted it now. He wanted this whole thing over and done with, quickly and quietly. I lifted my head and looked at my son, then at his wife. I tried to ask them one more time. My voice was frail, barely a whisper. Is this a will?" My son let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cold sound, full of smugness and contempt. To me, it was the most jarring, most repulsive sound I had ever heard. "Yeah, you're getting old, Dad. It's better if we just handle everything. It's more practical for everything to be in our names." He said it as if I were a child, incapable of making decisions about my own life. It's more practical for everything to be in our names. That was their justification for this robbery. They wanted to take everything I had, to reduce me to nothing, a man with no home, no assets, and no power at all. My hand, gripping the pen, was trembling. My eyes were fixed on the blank white paper, on the single, stark line printed beneath the words, "Testator's signature." There was no strength left in me to resist. My body felt frail and hollow. My mind was a thick, impenetrable fog. I felt like a young bird trapped in a cage, with no strength to fly, no way to escape. Every last bit of my power, every ounce of my will to fight back, seemed to have been completely drained away, leaving nothing behind. Slowly, I lowered the pen to the paper. I signed my name. The letters were shaky, a distorted, jagged version of my once firm handwriting. That signature was not an act of consent. It was a symbol of surrender, a testament to my own powerlessness. I signed it not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. I had been coerced, drugged, and stripped of all my right to self-determination. The moment the signature was complete, my son grabbed the back of my wheelchair and spun it around with a sharp, forceful push. He turned his back on me, never once meeting my gaze. But I could see the look on his face reflected in the window, a wide, triumphant grin, an expression of pure, smug satisfaction. He spoke to me in a voice that was cold, clipped, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Pack your things and get out. This house isn't yours anymore, Dad." That sentence, again, Each word was like a knife, twisting in a wound that had never closed. This house isn't yours anymore. I had now been stripped of even the right to live in my own home. I was a stranger, a homeless man being cast out of the place I had always considered my sanctuary. I sat there in my wheelchair, watching them as they walked away, their backs turned to me. They left me all alone in the cold, silent room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but my heart was a cavern of darkness. I had never felt so utterly and profoundly alone. I had lost everything, my home, my savings, and worst of all, I had lost the bond of family, my faith in the basic decency of people. No tears came. I had already cried all the tears I had. Now, there was nothing left inside but a vast, hollow emptiness. But deep within that emptiness, in the very core of my being, a tiny spark began to glow. They thought I was defeated. They believed I was completely broken, a puppet in their hands. But they were wrong. No matter how weak my body had become, no matter how clouded my mind had been, my will, my unbreakable spirit was still there. They had no idea. They didn't know that I still had an ace up my sleeve. A plan I had put in place long ago, a secret they knew nothing about. I would not be broken. No! I would not accept this cruel fate without a fight. I would get my justice, and I would make them understand the consequences of their greed and their heartless cruelty. Even after signing that will, even after my own son and his wife had so cruelly thrown me out of my own home, there was no despair left in me. Instead, something else had taken its place. A fire of raw anger and an unbreakable will to fight back began to burn inside me. Hotter and stronger than ever before. They must have thought I was a broken man, a useless old fool lost to dementia, someone they could easily cast aside. But they were wrong. They had underestimated me. I was not a man who would go down so easily. That very night, after they had escorted me to the cramped little room they had prepared for me, I put my plan into action. My body was still weak and unsteady from the sleeping pills they had forced on me, but my mind was sharper and clearer than it had been in weeks. I knew this was my one and only chance to act, and I could not let it slip away. I reached under the thin cushion of my wheelchair and pulled out an old cell phone. It was a simple, older model, a flip phone that I kept just for myself, fully charged and hidden away for an emergency just like this. No one else in the world knew it even existed. I had always kept it with me, tucked away out of sight, just in case. My fingers, though they trembled slightly, dialed a number I knew by heart. I was calling my oldest and dearest friend, Bill Thompson. Bill wasn't just a friend I'd known since we were young men, he was also a brilliant and honest attorney. One of the few people in this world I trusted completely and without reservation. When he answered the phone, my voice came out as a weak whisper, but my words were clear and firm. Bill, it's Arthur Miller. I need your help. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Bill was clearly surprised to hear from me. He knew I had been in the hospital, and he knew I had been dealing with serious health problems. I didn't waste any time. As concisely and clearly as I could, I told him everything. I told him about the fall, about being locked in the storage room, about the drugs they had been putting in my food and water. I told him how they had coerced me into signing the will and then thrown me out of my own house. They thought I was in a daze, I said, and the bitterness in my voice was a sharp, painful thing. They thought I wouldn't know what was happening. But I was prepared, Bill. I was ready for them. I have recordings of everything they said from the moment they locked me in that room, to the moment they forced my signature, to the moment they laughed about how helpless I was. From the very first day I was trapped in that storage room, I knew something was terribly wrong. I fought with every fiber of my being to keep my mind as clear as possible. Every single time my son or his wife came near the door, I secretly activated the recording function on my hidden phone. I captured everything, their cold, cruel words, their sinister plans, their contemptuous laughter. I had been so careful, so deliberate, making sure they never suspected a thing. This recording was my trump card. This was the proof that would bring them down. Bill was quiet for a long moment after I finished. When he finally spoke, his voice was more resolute and determined than I had ever heard it. "Arthur, you did the right thing. This is incredible evidence. We are going to get your justice back for you." He promised he would come and pick me up the next morning. Together, he said, we would go to the bank, and then we would go to the county offices. The next morning, just as the first rays of sunlight were filtering through the small, grimy window of my room, Bill Thompson arrived, just as he had promised. I got into his car, and we drove straight to my bank. As I walked through the heavy glass doors, the look of exhaustion and despair that had been etched onto my face just the day before was gone. In its place was a look of unshakable resolve, of pure, steely determination. Inside the bank, with Mr. Thompson right there beside me, I immediately requested a freeze on all of my accounts. We presented the evidence of the abuse and the blatant attempt to steal my property. I demanded that my son's power of attorney over my accounts be revoked immediately, and I insisted that any and all suspicious transactions that had occurred while I was being held captive be nullified. Faced with the presence of my lawyer and the irrefutable proof I provided, the bank manager had no choice but to act swiftly and do exactly as I asked. After we left the bank, we drove directly to the county courthouse. There, I filed a formal petition requesting a full investigation into elder abuse. I submitted every piece of evidence I had collected, including the audio recordings. Mr. Thompson was incredible. He calmly and clearly explained the potential legal consequences and the criminal charges my son and daughter-in-law were now facing. I knew this was only the beginning of a long and grueling legal battle. But I wasn't afraid. I had the evidence, I had my lawyer, and more importantly, I had the unshakable will to get my justice back. They must have thought I was just a frail, weak old man, someone they could easily manipulate and discard. But they were wrong. I was going to teach them that a parent, no matter how old, is not someone you can simply trample on and throw away. I had played my ace. And now, the game had changed completely. After I filed the request for an elder abuse investigation and had my bank accounts frozen, the news spread much faster than I ever could have imagined. Perhaps it was because of Mr. Thompson's intervention, or perhaps my story was just so painful and shocking that it immediately caught the attention of the media. I never wanted to be famous, but I desperately wanted the truth to come out into the light. A local television station contacted Bill Thompson, asking if they could interview me. I agreed. I wanted to tell my story, not for the sake of revenge, but to sound an alarm for our society, to help protect other elderly people from finding themselves in the same horrific situation. I appeared on local television. My face was a roadmap of wrinkles, etched by 80 years of life, but my eyes were crystal clear and filled with a quiet, steely resolve. I told them everything. I recounted the entire story, from the fateful fall that had crippled me, to the dark days I spent locked in that storage room. I described being drugged, being forced to sign the will, and the moment I was thrown out of my own home. I held back no details. I didn't embellish anything, and I didn't leave anything out. I simply told the truth. My voice, though frail, carried a strange and undeniable strength. Even at 80 years old, I said, looking directly into the camera, I was locked away like a prisoner. But I will not accept being reduced to nothing simply because I am old. Those words resonated in the hearts of millions of people. Immediately, my story ignited a firestorm of outrage throughout the community. Thousands, then tens of thousands, of people expressed their sympathy for me and their fury toward my son and his wife. Elder advocacy groups from all over the country mobilized. They contacted Mr. Thompson, offering their legal support and calling on society as a whole to condemn elder abuse. Newspapers, television stations, and social media platforms picked up my story and reported on it continuously, turning my case into an urgent issue, a wake-up call to the sad reality that some of our nation's elderly are being abused and exploited by their own children. My lawyer, Bill Thompson, worked tirelessly. He gathered more evidence, cooperated with the authorities, and officially filed a lawsuit against my son and his wife. The lawsuit included the following charges: coercion. They used violence and intimidation to force me to sign the will against my consent. Physical abuse. They imprisoned me in a storage shed, depriving me of adequate light, food, and sanitary conditions. Elder financial exploitation. They drugged me in a calculated scheme to force me to sign away my assets, attempting to steal my entire life savings. I understood that the road ahead would be fraught with hardship. I knew this legal battle could drag on for months, maybe even years, and that I would have to face the denials and excuses of my own son and his wife. But I didn't flinch. I had more than enough evidence. I had a brilliant lawyer by my side, and most importantly, I had the support of the entire community. I looked out the window. The morning light was just beginning to stream in, casting long shadows across the room. My heart, against all odds, felt strangely light. I had not been broken. I had stood up, and I had fought back. I fought not just for myself, but for every other elderly person suffering from injustice and abuse, for every quiet voice that had been silenced. I had lost so much, but I had reclaimed my justice, and to me, that was more precious than any amount of money or property in the world. I would continue this fight until the whole truth was laid bare and justice was fully and completely served. After the trial, my life entered a new chapter. I no longer live in that old house, the one that holds so many sad and painful memories, and I decided I didn't want to live alone anymore. I made the choice to move into an assisted living community, a place with dedicated, around-the-clock care. It's a quiet, immaculate place, blessed with lush, manicured gardens and bright, warm sunshine. I have my own private room, and it's well appointed with everything I need. Every morning, I wake up to a cup of fragrant hot tea. I sit by the window, sometimes reading a book, sometimes just gazing out at the scenery, enjoying the profound sense of peace and tranquility. The nurses and caregivers here are all incredibly dedicated and thoughtful, always greeting me with a warm smile. They not only take care of my physical needs, but also tend to my spirit, always taking the time to talk with me, to ask how I'm feeling, to simply show they care. In the twilight of my life, I have finally found the peace and comfort I had always hoped for. I no longer have to worry about paying for groceries or covering my living expenses. I no longer live in fear of being abused or abandoned. I am living in a safe environment where I feel loved and respected. I no longer call them family. It was a difficult decision, but it was also a truth I had to accept. My son and his wife, through their own cruel and heartless actions, had severed every tie that bound us together. They had trampled on my feelings and betrayed the immense gift of the life and upbringing I had given them. I had always held a simple truth in my heart, that your own flesh and blood, the people who were given life by you, could never be so cruel. Family ties, I now know, are not just about the constraints of blood. They are woven from love, from care, from respect, and from gratitude. The people who treated me with such cruelty, who tried to take everything I had, who abandoned me in the most inhumane way, they no longer have the right to be called my family. After the trial, I donated the majority of the assets I recovered to a foundation that supports abused and neglected seniors. It is my deepest hope that this fund will become a place they can turn to, a source of hope for elderly individuals who find themselves in the same situation I was in. People who have suffered abuse and neglect at the hands of their own children. I want them to know that they are not alone. I want them to know that there are resources available to help them stand up, reclaim their justice, and find peace in their own lives again. I have lived a life full of turmoil and trials. I have experienced extreme pain and bitter betrayal, but I did not fall. I stood up, I fought, and in the end, I won. And so, if one day you hear a knock on your door, and you find an old man standing there who says, "My name is Arthur Miller. I've come to hear your story," please believe him. We elderly people are not invisible. We are not a burden. We are not weak, disposable things that can be easily cast aside. We have voices, we have dignity, and we have the right to live our lives in peace and fulfillment. My story is a testament to that. And with that, the story of my life comes to a close. I imagine that over the course of my story, you have traveled with me through every possible emotion, from the depths of pain and humiliation to the heights of hope, and, finally, to a place of peace. A person's life, especially in their later years, can be filled with so many unexpected surprises and trials. There was a time when I truly believed I was broken, that I would simply accept the cruel fate that others had forced upon me. But thankfully, that unyielding spark of resilience inside me never went out, and because of it, I was able to find the light of justice and discover what true peace really means. Through sharing my story, my goal was not just to recount my personal journey to reclaim what was mine, but also to send a small message out into the world. I hope that what I've shared can serve as a reminder, a beacon of hope, for anyone who is facing hardship or injustice in their own life. No matter your age, and no matter your circumstances, we must never give up on ourselves or on our own dignity. Always be strong, do not be afraid to ask for help, and hold on to the belief that the light of justice will always, eventually, shine through. I have now found a serene and peaceful harbor in my life. Every day feels meaningful, fulfilling, and beautifully calm. It brings me a profound sense of happiness to see the seeds I have sown begin to sprout, little by little, through the foundation I established to support abused seniors. Watching others who have suffered find a place where they can receive help and share their experiences is a gift. Once again, I want to express my most sincere gratitude to all of you who have given your precious time to listen to my story up to this very moment. Your willingness to listen, to truly hear what I had to say, is the greatest source of motivation an old man like me could ever ask for. I hope we can meet again for another story sometime soon. Perhaps it will be about the lives of my elderly friends here at the assisted living community. Or maybe I will share the stories of the people who have been helped by my support fund. Until then, let us continue to spread good values together, and may we all strive to ensure that this life is always filled with an abundance of love and kindness,